All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're a minute or two past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming back to the second in our six-part lectureship series that's co-sponsored by NASEO and NGA. This is concerning all things comprehensive statewide energy plans and energy planning. So this is quite a meaty topic, so we've decided to tranche it out over 6 months and hope to really get into the nitty-gritty of how you do statewide planning. Before we get started, I want to briefly acknowledge our sponsors. We're sponsored between NASEO and NGA by three separate offices from the U.S. Department of Energy, by the Grid Deployment Office, the Office of Electricity, and the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. So hearty thanks to our sponsors who make this work possible. We really appreciate your support, and it's exciting to get federal funding to work with states and help in this effort. Just to kind of refresh memory, since it's been about a month since we last convened, in our kickoff webinar, we heard from several states on how you actually start the process of energy planning, either through legislation, administrative orders, executive orders, the kinds of resources and approaches that some states are taking, and some kind of tips and tricks on how to kick that off, how to deal with legislators, how to create new organizations and begin this process. And so really for today, we wanted to get into the next phase. So now your governor, your director of the energy office, been tasked with creating these statewide energy plans. And how do you go about doing this very labor intensive, heavy lift? And what kind of oversight or governance structures are built into this process? And so we're going to hear from two states today, North Dakota and Washington State, in that order, really talk about the councils that were formed in and around their statewide energy planning, how those interacted with the energy office, with the governor's office, perhaps the legislature, other structures of state government, and really just how you ensure that governance is appropriate, that is using the resources laid out well, and is taking into account, the statewide footprint of these types of plans. So we have an excellent panel that I'll go ahead and briefly introduce now before turning over to them. So we have from North Dakota, Rich Garman, the director of North Dakota's Department of Commerce. We have Tom Oakland, the Energy and Economic Coordination Office Manager from the North Dakota Department of Commerce. And we have Dr. Gwen Blackman, Director, Energy Policy Office in the Washington Department of Commerce. So really excited to have you here, gentlemen. Appreciate you taking the time to chat with us this afternoon. Before we get into the real meat of the discussion, a couple of housekeeping notes. We do have a website with the first webinar recording up and ready to go. I'll drop that into the chat when I go off camera in just a moment. And also, as we're listening to our three panelists speak, if you have questions or things jump to mind, go ahead and put them in the chat. That way, when we get to the question and answers section at the end of this webinar, towards the end, we'll have those queued up and be able to pose them directly to our panelists. Don't be shy. I know a lot of your states are going through this process or considering going through this process. So please jump in with questions and we'll get through as many as we can by the end. I think that's all I had on the housekeeping side. I want to turn it over to my colleague Sam from NASEO. Any housekeeping or announcements on your side, Sam?
No, Chris, I think you covered it pretty well. Just really excited to continue talking about the energy planning process and kind of digging into some of this work with the councils here.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. All right. Well, without further preamble, I'll turn it over to our friends from North Dakota. I'll let you guys go in whichever order you like.
All right. Thank you. Thanks so much, Chris. Hold on. We got a little echo there. I think we got it fixed now. All right. Thank you, Chris. The way we're going to pursue this is I'll open. My name is Rich Garman, Director of Economic Development and Finance in North Dakota. And my colleague Tom will be on here in just a second. I'm going to talk to you about what we have going on in North Dakota for a few minutes. And then Tom's going to dive into the numbers and the figures on the second half of the presentation. We've got a few slides that we'd like to share, and I'm going to make that effort right now. I'm going to work a little bit on what we have and some of the attributes we have in North Dakota and things that are going on in North Dakota right now. And then Tom will dive a little bit deeper into some of the energy, specific energy items. I'll start moving through here. We're going to talk about project opportunities that we have on the table right now in North Dakota that revolve a lot around energy. Seems like everything we do has an energy aspect. In fact, that happens quite often to Tom when we split projects up amongst our development entities. Everybody wants to push it on Tom's plate because everything has a big energy need, and we're working towards that. Not everything can be under Tom's responsibility, so we're pushing back on that a little bit and moving that around somewhat. I want to talk about one of the things that you're going to hear me say this probably 5-6 times in this presentation. believer in innovation over regulation. That's a catchphrase that our governor has really been pushing along. And the more you think about it, and the more you know about North Dakota, that's truly what we do. In North Dakota, we work hard to try to write policy to encourage companies to innovate in directions that we want them to maintain, whether it's water or quality or energy planning or air quality. We work hard to encourage companies to innovate themselves, so we don't have to force anybody to do anything. So innovation over regulation, you're going to hear that several times in what we do. The slide that I have up right now is entitled Policy, and I want to talk a little bit about one big advantage that we have in North Dakota. And we'll get a little bit deeper into this, but one big advantage we have in North Dakota that seems to be very, very marketable right now is our ability to sequester carbon dioxide. There's only 3 states in the nation right now that have primacy, which means it gives the states the authority to permit to sequester carbon dioxide from any source. And obviously a big source of carbon dioxide is from electrical generation in a lot of situations. We have that capability in North Dakota, and we have a few other things in North Dakota that make that very possible. We have the geology, we have the pore space available. And with that pore space, what we've done is we've passed legislation, we've passed policy to define who owns that pore space. It's a valuable commodity, underground commodity. Well, who owns that? Is that the mineral owner? Is that the surface owner, or who is that? In the case of North Dakota, it's the surface owner. They own the pore space underground. So we've got that defined. Liability transfer is another great example of policy that North Dakota has put in place for this particular entity of carbon sequestration. Liability transfer means that after 10 years after the carbon dioxide has been sequestered in North Dakota, the state takes over the liability of the project from the company that originally did it. Now, there's a lot of rules and a lot of regulations on how to do it, but we encourage the company. Then the stick is we will take over the liability after 10 years. It's funded by a fee on a per ton fee for carbon dioxide, and then we assume the liability and utilize that fund if there ever is a liability claim. Talked a little bit about primacy already. What primacy means in this specific case, we have primacy over several things, but in this specific case in carbon dioxide, we have, well, hold on here a second. I thought I was. Is that better? There we go. I thought I was in presentation mode. I wasn't. I apologize. Now I am. Primacy gives us the ability to permit our own wells in this particular case for carbon sequestration. We currently have permitted, I believe it's 11 or 12 wells in the state, and we have 2 more on deck. Nationwide, I believe there's been 4 wells permitted from states that do not have primacy. So our rate of being able to approve that primacy is much greater than the average across the nation. The other thing that North Dakota has that is a driving force, again, it's not driven by rules, it's policies, is a carbon neutrality goal by 2030. That's a very bold goal, especially a very bold goal that has a lot of hydrocarbon-based energy in it. We're slowly marching towards that. We're getting closer all the time. We don't know exactly what everything is going to entail for us to achieve that. We have a good idea of the projects we need to accomplish, but that goal, it's a goal that's out in front of us that helps us recruit projects and helps us write smart policy to achieve that carbon neutrality goal. Again, it's not a stick, it's a carrot. We try to encourage companies to help us achieve that goal. We'll talk about a few things that obviously we have no control over. We're just blessed with it, is geology. We're blessed with the geology under the state, about half the state of North Dakota, to have the geology to be able to sequester carbon dioxide, obviously in use for power generation, carbon capture. So we're blessed with the geology. We didn't have anything to do with that, but we're willing to accept that. About that we do have North Dakota, Wyoming, Louisiana all have class 6 well primacy. Our first demonstrations on this. Our first pure sequestration occurred in June of 2022. Other carbon dioxide from North Dakota has been sequestered, but it's been in enhanced oil recovery. And we've actually been collecting carbon dioxide at a facility that we have called Dakota Gasification for over 20 years. And that via a pipeline to Saskatchewan for enhanced oil recovery. So we've been in this business quite some time. Another key number there is North Dakota has the capacity of 252 billion tons of carbon dioxide sequestration. There's a few statistics out there that's, I don't remember even, it's decades worth of sequestration capabilities under the state. Another thing that we have in North Dakota that is unique based upon our population size. We have a small population in North Dakota, 800,000 people, a little less than 800,000 people. We joke about 1 degree of separation in North Dakota, kind of smile. We play the game of, do you know this person or do you know that person? And the bottom line is yes. And there's a chance that you're related to them as well in North Dakota because we have a very small population. But what that does from a preparation standpoint for projects is we have very easy access to officials. If you need to talk to Public Service Commission officials, the governor's office, State Water Commission, name the agency you need to talk to if you're bringing a project in, transmission authority, pipeline authority, we generally can make that meeting happen in a matter of days, if not hours. If the opportunity presents itself, we can put that together quickly. So that small population and a small degree of separation is very advantageous to companies that want to come in and develop in North Dakota. Quick response from regulatory agencies. We talked about the response on Class 6 permits. That level of service extends upon every permit or every regulatory agency that we have out there. We measure our response time in weeks or months, not years. And I think that's true of every agency we have. The agency that Tom and I both work in pride ourselves on a concierge level effort of service on virtually every project we work on. We will be your expert guide through North Dakota policy, and we do that. Again, you see my policy of innovation over regulation. We will leave that where it is. Not just briefly, I want to bounce through some of the project opportunities that we have out here, most of which are very energy intensive. And then Tom will talk about our opportunities to bring energy to the forefront. We've got hundreds of projects on deck. Nebulous number on what's actually going and what's not. But at our best count, we've got hundreds plus projects on deck and over $60 billion in capital investment working towards investing in North Dakota. Many of those reasons are our carbon policies, our carbon neutrality policies, and our ability to offer that to the energy sectors. But again, innovation over regulation is another big reason is we don't try to over-regulate the companies that want to land here. Oops, sorry about that. Some of the high energy need, and one of the reasons that they're looking to locate to North Dakota is because our ability to provide that energy need, whether it be carbon neutral energy or other. Excuse me. We have a large gas to liquids facility looking to locate in northwest North Dakota, which will take natural gas and process that natural gas into a low carbon diesel fuel plus other valuable byproducts, liquid byproducts of natural gas. We have at least 3, if not more, sustainable aviation fuel facilities that are looking to locate in North Dakota. And when I say and more, we probably have at least 3 greenfield sites that want to come build sustainable aviation fuel, and then several other ones that want to come in and do bolt-on technology onto existing ethanol facilities we have. Again, very energy intensive. Critical minerals is another big projects that are eyeing the state of North Dakota. Our vast coal reserves are being recognized now as not only being a vast energy reserve, but being a vast reserve of critical minerals, opportunities to extract those critical minerals out of that lignite coal supply. Sort of a surprise, kind of a out of the blue type of thing is we have a real opportunity to extract lithium in North Dakota via produced water from oil sites, which typically a waste stream of salt water coming from an oil well. has now actually been shown that it can produce a significant volume of lithium extracted from that water byproduct. The other big kind of very, very broad, probably with some of the biggest things that we have right now that are extremely energy intensive, that are very much evaluating North Dakota as a place to be, are data centers. North Dakota catches a bad rap a lot of times for being cold. It is. It's significantly colder here in the winter than a lot of other places. We have fairly mild summer. But one of the industries that absolutely loves that is data, because they need a massive amount of cooling in warmer climates. So data is something we're coming to grips with. Traditionally on projects, a SAF project or ore processing, I'll leave ore processing out, that's an exception, but SAF processing, they come to the table and say, hey, we need a dozen megawatts, we need 30 megawatts, something like that. Every data project we get starts at 100 and goes up from there. They get into the gigawatt level fairly quickly. So that's data. We're doing a lot of opportunity evaluation for data. We've got a few facilities under construction right now and predict that there will be a lot more. We do have some crypto facilities that are up and running, but that's kind of the precursor to that whole data wave. Is data AI is the next wave that is very much evaluating North Dakota for many reasons. We have biotech, UAS, autonomy. We have an extremely robust UAS opportunities in North Dakota. That's uncrewed aerial systems. Partnered, well, actually co-located on the Grand Forks Air Force Base. We do a lot of autonomy study there, and we're on the verge of blossoming that into an incredible industry. Not extremely energy intensive, but still there. Ag product processing is huge now in North Dakota. We have three. We have one operational and two mid-construction egg processing plants that'll be processing soybeans. We have 6 corn-based ethanol facilities in the state. Hydrogen's another opportunity out there, which is very much in the energy sector. North Dakota is a key player in the Heartland Hydrogen Hub. That's just in the very early stages, but hydrogen as an energy source is really moving forward. Fertilizer facilities. North Dakota is on the end of the logistics chain for fertilizer, and our number 2 economy driver is agriculture. So having a reliable opportunity, a reliable source of fertilizer is very important to the ag community. Again, that's very closely tied to energy, because a lot of that it's tied in one of two. It's either manufactured as a feedstock, or number 2, it's a green version of that, where we use an extremely large amount of energy to do electrolysis of water and make green hydrogen. Either way, very much tied into the energy industry. And then it's a simple step from hydrogen into fertilizer. Obviously, fertilizer is just the next step in the hydrogen production. Autonomy means more than just air autonomy. I guess it's so important I put it on there twice, actually. But autonomy, we actually have a large study facility called Grand Farm that we're studying what farm autonomy looks like, what, self-guided tractors and self-guided equipment on farms. So autonomy is another big opportunity in North Dakota. Last but definitely not least, power generation. In order to manage all of this incredible growth that North Dakota is walking through, we have to have power production. We are a very energy-rich state, and we're recognizing now that we need probably more power production now than ever before. And Tom will talk to you a little bit more about that. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Stepping right up to your slide there then, Tom. So did you want, I'm assuming we'll stop, we'll just slide right into Tom's presentation and then questions later?
Yeah, sounds great. We'll go to Tom and then to Glenn, and then we'll do questions afterwards.
Perfect.
Great.
Get to mute.
All right. So Rich touched on a lot of the basics as far as what we're focused on in terms of economic development, a lot of interest coming to the state. I just want to kind of hit on some of the whys as far as current status and the where we're at as far as our production and consumption numbers. So right off the get-go, I just want to really hit on the fact baseload power is such an important part here in North Dakota. Last year, we had roughly 40% of our megawatt hours were produced from wind and hydro. So significant portion coming from renewables, which is great. However, with that being said, and the aging there's a large amount of growth, and that growth and consumption is going to have to be met with more generations. So one of the big concerns we have going forward is making sure that we enable companies to build out more generation. And I guess one of the catchphrases that we've got out there is talking about the energy transformation. Like transition is the common one we're talking about right now across the country or across the world, but really we're not looking at moving away from certain types of fuels into new. We're looking at being more additive. With the growth estimates out there, I know just recently SPP came out with the indefinite end of 4.5% per year growth in consumption need. And with that being said, you can move on to the next slide here, Rich. Baseload in North Dakota is aging. We've got many coal-fired power plants, for example, and the average age of those coal plants is well over 40 years old. So with that, we're looking at ways of building out new generation, and not just in the wind industry, which has been a big growth in the last 15 years, but trying to get more on the natural gas side as well. You can hit the next slide. So here's a quick map just looking across the country of the coal capacity. And we've all read it. We've seen the charts from system operations and so forth. The coal plants across the country, there's many of them that have a retirement date set. And even though that might be 10 or 15 years down the road, one of the big concerns would be, how long does it take to build a new baseload generation site? Next slide. So here's the current status right now. This last year in North Dakota, we are producing over 40 million megawatt hours of energy. However, with that being said, we are also consuming nearly 70% of that within the state. And our generation from 2022 to 23 actually went down. Some of that could just be related to the amount of wind and the capacity factors there, but also the fact that some of the coal plants were retired as well. So we actually went down in generation, but meanwhile, our consumption went up by nearly 13%. Those numbers are something that we're looking at closely and want to focus on how to enable more generation going forward. Like the project list that Rich just went through has a lot of large energy users, many of which are natural gas directly, but some of them are needing a lot of megawatt hours, data being the number one. Next slide, Rich. So this next slide shows same. You can see our growth rate has increased overall over the last 13 years, but our consumption, especially in the last 3 years, has rose dramatically. So this growth rate is somewhat scary when you look at how many power plants are coming offline. So we want to really focus on the fact that we need more going forward. I actually have this stat in here. This came from I think it was a NASEO call recently. Georgia Power threw out the stat that their growth across their entire area they provide power to rose by 82%. Well, I shouldn't say rose by 82%. 82% of their new growth in the past few years was just due to data. And so that trend is only increasing with the move to more AI and more data centers needed. So long term, what are we looking at? In North Dakota, we've got roughly double the natural gas output coming forward in the next decade from what we have right now. So one of the big ways that we could make more power would be by producing more from natural gas. And with that, that would help provide power for a lot of these new plants coming online, but also to our neighboring states that utilize our power. looking at, for example, SPP and NASEO gave us this data here recently. Over 11 gigawatts of power, new generation, are out there in the queue, of which, of that 11 gigawatts, only 750 megawatts of that is baseload power. You know, the rest of it would be either wind or solar or hybrid. So really wanting to hammer that home that we need more baseload power. So long term, and this would be obviously a little ways out there, one of the things we are looking at is nuclear power. And there's several other states out there that are actually helping us with this as well. I know there's policy changes going on across the country right now, trying to pave the way for nuclear. And so that's one of the thoughts that we have as well going forward. Next slide. And this last slide here just shows the growth over the years. And, you know, you can see that overall, like, we've kind of been flat for the last decade, but I really want to emphasize that 4.5% rise per year across the United States, that's estimated, is going to require a significant amount of new generation. And with that, you know, we're working on it from all of the above approach, but overall, we're hoping to make a smooth transformation, not transition, going forward. And this one here, I just want to quickly hit on. As a state, we have this whole to help pave the way for this. We've got various research councils, each of which is kind of geared towards specific sectors: renewables, lignite, and oil and gas. But then we also have, just in the last 4 years here, we've got the Clean and Sustainable Energy Authority. And that fund has provided nearly $500 million in loans, low interest loans through Bank of North Dakota, along with grants for projects that are ranging from carbon sequestration, along with new rare earth extraction for new elements, and then also just new manufacturing related to large energy consumers. So this is like one way that the state is stepping in and definitely taking an active role in trying to promote more growth. And with that, I think that is our last slide here from North Dakota. So we can move on to Washington or move on to questions, whichever you'd prefer.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Rich. Go ahead and go to Glenn, and then we'll do kind of a rolling question and answer for the remainder of the time. So Glenn, whenever you're ready.
And is the correct screen showing up there, the one with my slides? Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm Glenn Blackman, Director of the Energy Policy Office at the Washington State Department of Commerce. It's great to be here with other Department of Commerce people, because we do all kinds of things in our work. One of the states.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about the development of our state energy strategy work that we conducted in 2020 to publish the 2021 state energy strategy. And because I'm going to be talking about, kind of process, governance, things like that, I want to, before I get into that, just say a little bit about the product itself, because we do think it was really a great product that helps people in our state, and maybe even beyond that, figure out how to think about and do something about some really important issues that affect our country and our world. So this is just one slide from the state energy strategy that shows the vision as of 2050. There's a lot more that goes into it before that, but it just, and then I've got the link to it. So I'm hoping that it's intriguing enough that you might, later when you have some time, look at the full product itself. But in the meantime, I'm going to get back to governance of developing the plan itself. And so for us, that starts with the statute that authorizes the Department of Commerce to produce a state energy strategy. And it gives us objectives or principles for us to use in that. These three that I list here, I would say are kind of the core ones about affordability of service, competitiveness and availability of energy to support our economy, and then consistency with our state's greenhouse gas obligations, ones that we've established for ourselves by the legislature. And for the 2021 strategy, the legislature was very specific about developing a strategy that was consistent with the clean electricity law that it had just enacted and with an update to the greenhouse gas emissions limits. So those ground principles really helped us develop a state energy strategy without, say, having to, kind of rediscuss, well, should we, aim for a 20% reduction or a 40% reduction in emissions? Is 100% clean electricity a good idea or not? That was already answered. We just needed to come up with a strategy to implement that. There are principles that have been added over the years. So we were rich in principles, but the ones that I've listed here in the first two bullet points are the ones that we focused on primarily. The legislature also said some things about how we would go about doing this. It says that the Governor Inslee, would appoint a chair of the advisory committee, and I'll talk more about that committee here in a minute. But so it carries some significance, to have a gubernatorial appointment for this. Governor Inslee actually appointed two people to be co-chairs. One was a business person from the clean energy sector, and then the other was a longtime leader in the environmental sector for the state. Provided a really nice balance. Some people will probably look at that and say, well, it doesn't include everybody, and it doesn't, but it does provide some balance between environmental objectives and business interests. It also authorized us to set up technical committees, which we actually chose not to do in this strategy. And instead, we just did a lot of small group type work without formal technical committees in the different sectors that were covered in the strategy. And then it requires extensive public involvement throughout the development of the strategy. That would be a given for us in any case, but it is part of the statutory direction. So I want to talk now about the advisory committee, because that was something that I think was of particular interest in terms of this webinar. Our advisory committee is, it's a statutory list of entities who are to be selected. It includes legislators, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, one from each. The caucuses appointed those. Often it was the Energy Committee chair, but in some cases it was someone at that chair kind of assigned that job to. And then we had government representation in there, a lot of different energy providers, and then some consumers and different types of stakeholders and tribes that were represented. It's a big list, and it's one that I would say is it's like over the years, the legislature has added positions as things became, kind of like new elements of the public interest were developed. They didn't do much in the way of trimming off some of the older things. So it wouldn't be that the advisory committee that we would necessarily pick for ourselves, but we did work with what we had. As it turned out, it ended up being really quite a lot of natural gas industry was on the advisory committee because some of the electric utility spots were companies that also had a gas business. Electric utilities got even their role in it too, because some of the city representative, was like from a city utility. Just at the end of the day, there was plenty of representation of the electricity and natural gas industry within this advisory committee. And, it was much harder, I would say, to get, make sure that the interests of the overburdened communities, low-income households, and even environmental interests, to make sure that those were adequately represented was a bigger challenge for us, and one that prompted us to take more initiative on those areas to make sure those voices were included. In terms of some practical considerations for the advisory committee, it turns out it's hard to pick 27 people. Even if the legislature gives you the list of, the kind of the slots for the different people, trying to figure out, well, of the 14 different rural electric co-ops, which one are we going to put on the committee? And which farmer wants to be the agricultural representative? It turns out it's hard to get a farmer to come to these meetings. We ended up with the executive director of the Potato Commission, and we were happy to have him. Figuring out who to appoint as co-chairs and working with the governor's office to get that decision made, it took a lot of work. So it ended up actually taking us a few months to figure out all the different members of the advisory committee so that we could then actually get them together. We also realized that we needed to make sure that we would do a good job of kind of care and feeding of the advisory committee. So we contracted for facilitation services that was specifically for themselves and to support the advisory committee members and the work they were doing. It was a separate engagement that we had from the more technical consultants that we hired to help us with the analysis and the preparation of recommendations and things like that. And then we used the advisory committees kind of as the vehicle for public involvement. We were able to make presentations to the advisory committee that were open to the public. When it came time to get public feedback, the members of the public were able to present their comments to the advisory committee. It gave the public kind of, somebody to speak to specifically and personally in the form of these advisory committee members. We also established early on kind of whose strategy this was going to be at the end, that the advisory committee members weren't going to be asked to endorse the strategy. It also meant they didn't get to decide what was in and out of the strategy. The strategy was the department's work product, and the advisory committee provided advice and input to that. However, they also deserve their own voice. And so through the facilitator that I mentioned before, we provided the opportunity for a separate advisory committee report. So that provided an opportunity for people to, if they had a particular emphasis or concern, they could express that through the advisory committee report. And if you go to that website that I showed before, you can see that that report exists alongside the energy strategy itself. And then I wanted to talk a little bit in terms of governance about what happens after the strategy is done. So as you can see, I just skipped over the big part in the middle where we actually do the strategy and, what might go into that, because, I'm here today to talk about more of this procedural part. But when we were done, we submitted. And since then, it has become just part of the currency of energy policy in our state. It's frequently mentioned in budget documents and legislative proposals to, like in intent sections, it may be, as the energy strategy says, ... Or if it's in a budget provision, it might say that we're supposed to develop a program using this money and do it in a way that's consistent with the state energy strategy. Our law also provides for updates every 2 years of the strategy. This is a mechanism that helps us refresh the energy strategy and remind the ever-changing body of policymakers in our state about where we are on energy strategy. And since then, we've had the opportunity to drill deeper on specific topics that were identified in the energy strategy itself, or in just developments out there in the world of business, commerce, and government, so that, like, we did a much more detailed transportation electrification strategy. We recently hydrogen that take that as a starting point, the state energy strategy, but then go into more depth on a particular subject area. And then finally, I just want to note that we, like, if you read our statute, you would think we have this very regular interval for our energy strategies, that we do it every 8 years. And it really, the reality is that it's contingent on funding from the legislature. So we do an energy strategy when the legislature decides that it's time to do one again, and when they are prepared to fund it. And so I can't actually say when we're going to do one again. That some people are saying it's already looking like we should do another one. And I think others maybe are content with these more specialized studies that we've done since 2021. So that is what I have to offer today in terms of governance and process for developing the Washington State energy strategy. And I'm happy to talk about any of the details of that during the time we have here.
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Tom and Rich. Really appreciate all three of you taking the time to chat. We've got plenty of time left for questions. So folks in the audience, if you have something that jumps to mind, please put it in the chat and we'll pose it to our experts. I'm happy to go ahead and get the conversation kicked off. I mean, a lot to think through with both of your states. Both have really exciting opportunities / challenges. I know Tom and Rich, you mentioned load growth around data centers. You mentioned lots of energy resources in your state. And Glenn, you didn't touch on it specifically, but you guys have had a huge amount of in-migration over the last couple of decades and pretty exciting expected load growth as well. So when you're looking at these energy plans and you're looking for governance structures, you both talked about having these councils. How do you engage them well? Is there structures that are adjacent to government, maybe have government folks on them, but really aren't a true part of state government in the way that your offices are, your governor's office? So what was your strategy for interacting with these committees or commissions, councils, whatever you want to call them? And how did you take that feedback and governance and oversight into your planning process? I know that's kind of a long question, but be very curious on your thoughts.
I can kick it off here from North Dakota's point of view. So what we've got set up is the Industrial Commission, which is chaired by the Lieutenant Governor, and also the Department of Ag Commissioner as well is involved in that. And the Industrial Commission is above the councils that I had listed on the slide. So you've got the Lignite Energy for our coal industry. We've got Renewable Energy Council for all the renewable growth as well. And then they sponsor the programs such as the Clean and Sustainable Energy Authority, which is a large financing mechanism for a lot of these new programs. Basically, like each of these councils works together, and I want to throw out a big positive for our State Energy Research Center, which is the EERC, Energy and Environmental Research Center, that is working together with these councils a lot of times for research projects. And what we're able to do is, like, through our state legislature, they fund programs for each of these councils. And sorry, I'm getting an echo right now. All right, can you hear me now? Okay, so they're fund every 2 years when our legislature meets, they fund these programs that allow for private sector groups, whether it's existing companies or possibly other ones coming into the state, to help kick off, whether it's just the early stage research on the projects or whether it's expansion. And for example, we've got 2 very large carbon capture facilities being proposed right now, and those facilities are seeking some of the financing availability through these councils. So really, it's kind of a private and public partnership. So you've got guidance from both private companies along with our industrial commission through the governor's office.
And in Washington for the state energy strategy, we had, as I went through, quite a variety of interest groups that had a position on the advisory committee. But then we also went frequently to those groups themselves. And so they're not state organized committees the way Tom is describing in North Dakota, but like trade associations and environmental advocacy groups would, we'd have comment opportunities where they could submit written comments or suggestions on a draft that we might have produced. We did quite a bit of outreach, showing up at their meetings to present to them on the work that we were doing in the energy strategy, and then try to pull their input back into our process through that sort of informal outreach process.
Excellent. Thank you both. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll queue those up. For North Dakota, with your concerns around baseload power generation, can you talk a bit about concerns you may have with projects that move through the interconnection queue with your RTO ISO? Is that working well? So I'll pose that. And then Glenn, for you, was there legislation passed that required or provided parameters for the more specialized strategies you mentioned around clean transportation and hydrogen? So maybe go to North Dakota first and then back to Washington on those questions.
So yeah, that's a really good question. For North Dakota, we are part of 2 system operators, MISO and SPP. And we are definitely, both of those operators have been very good about communicating. Anytime, our Public Service Commission, us at Commerce, there's always an ongoing conversation about the future plans for, especially transmission right now is a big one. Is there do we have it figured out, and is it foolproof, a way to speed up projects and so forth? Not necessarily. There's a lot in the queue, and the queue is basically a line that, regardless of what type of power you're proposing, you're basically in line with the rest of them. So we've had some take to pass these projects through, and but at the same time, I know that both those operators, both MISO and SPP, are really actively working on ways to expedite projects, especially transmission projects right now, because as the growth grows for consumption, we're going to need more transmission for sure. And then one other side note too is that this is one thing that we're talking about at Commerce, is if there's a lengthy lead time to gain approval for a new generation site or new transmission line, is there any way that you could you could help the financial side of it through state-sponsored financing or something where the private companies, whether it's a cooperative or a regular utility company, they could possibly place their orders for equipment earlier on because there's such long lead times for a lot of these larger. That way you'd speed up the process overall in terms of the construction. But those are things we're talking about right now, but we're not necessarily, we don't have a program for it yet.
And before I answer that question, I just would want to say amen on the issues that Tom talks about with the interconnection queues. We have 2 fewer RTOs than North Dakota has. We have 0, but we still have an interconnection queue that's very large compared to the number of projects that actually get engineered and built in any given year. And it's a big issue for us, both in terms of the transformation of our economy to clean energy, but also in terms of meeting the needs of businesses that are wanting to do new things with electricity and grow our economy. But back to the question, which was about how we got the authority and the money for the specialized studies that did come from the legislature. Subsequent budgets would, again, like as I mentioned before, cite to the state energy strategy and say, do this or do that. So where the energy strategy had kind of laid out the outline of transportation electrification as being one of the most important elements of the strategy, the legislature said, okay, well, then let's go dig deeper on that and figure out how to actually implement that, where to put charging stations and how to finance those, et cetera. And then on hydrogen, hydrogen was kind of a unexpected element of the state energy strategy, at least when we started, because the modeling showed that there was a real new role for hydrogen potentially to, in some cases, soak up excess generation that would be coming out of a power system that was heavy on renewables. If you're going to use renewables, you, to some extent, have to overbuild to do that, which means then a lot of the time you'll have more power than you need at a particular moment. So producing hydrogen, which can then be used to replace fossil fuels, is an important new idea that came out of our strategy. I mean, I'm sure other people have had that same new idea, but it was new for us. And it led to legislation to set up hydrogen as a kind of an area of emphasis in terms of our energy and business policy. Led to us deciding to apply for and eventually win one of the big hydrogen hubs from the federal government. But it, part of that process was legislature funding a detailed analysis of the potential role for hydrogen in our economy.
Excellent. Thank you both. Not seeing any new questions and getting pretty close to the end of the hour, I guess I'll take the moderator's prerogative and ask you one more kind of closing thoughts. So both of your governors are real luminaries on energy, both very thoughtful, very specialists. And so I know they're deeply engaged in the policy setting process. You've also got a lot of stakeholders in your states, a lot of councils, organized labor, other groups that you both talked about. There's a lot of different ideas around energy and a lot of maybe not controversy, but disagreement on the best way to transform or the grid going forward. So when this tension or conflict arises between parties, what were there any ways that you found that were particularly effective in kind of smoothing those out or building some form of consensus? Obviously, it's impossible to get full consensus in complex states like both of yours, but if you dealt with conflict, would you let us know, what a good strategy to manage it was? And if not, then let us know how you got so lucky that everyone agrees in your state.
I'll go first this time. You know, as I mentioned before, we started with in our energy strategy work with a pretty specific set of principles from the legislature and the governor, and that didn't, eliminate disagreement by any means, but I would say that it helped focus the disagreement. And then the other thing that I think was important for us was to really invest in the analytical work. It's tempting to just kind of recycle the same ideas and the same positions that different stakeholders have, and maybe slice them and dice them a different way. And we resisted that temptation and said, let's start with, energy system modeling with data about how energy is used in every aspect of our economy, and try to solve for, at an economy-wide level, solutions that got us to our objectives in a cost-effective way. And then to look at a few, scenarios, alternative ways of doing that, and what the pros and cons would be. And I think that helped people discuss the options with a factual basis. It didn't mean that they always agreed with everything, but it just provided the facts that people could then use in their policy discussions.
I would say, as far as the approach we're going with here in North Dakota, education for the public would be number one. There's a lot of different opinions. You're never all going to be on the same page by any means, but just having everything transparent so that whatever questions the public has, there's an answer for it, but also just more engagement with communities, because the not in my backyard mentality it's everywhere. And then you mesh that with the concept of, like, whether someone's for or against a different type of fuel and so forth. There ends up being a lot of very strong opinions one way or the other, but trying to lay out the benefits that the energy industry is providing. And then I'd say also tying that with how it helps out other industries. Like for us, agriculture is number two. Energy is number one by dollars, I guess you'd call it, but I'd say agriculture is number one by people, by land mass, and so forth. There's so many farmers and so much food production in the state. Energy and agriculture go together. And so what we're trying to do is just kind of like engage with communities in terms of how the energy industry is assisting the agricultural side. And then also like the move to being carbon free or carbon neutral, how that not only you could look at it as a negative, but there's actually benefits out there. There's ways for farmers to benefit on that as well. So I think what our big goal is just transparency through education.
Excellent. Well, that feels like a great place to leave the conversation to today, and a great lead into our next conversation that'll be June 21st. We'll be getting into data collection and modeling, which both of you just touched on. Great ways to collect data, start processing it, really see where the resources lie and what states can do with that. So I won't hold us any longer, but I wanted to thank Glenn, Tom, and Rich again for speaking. Really appreciate your time, all three of you. And thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to chatting next month. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You guys.